just going to be quiet today? You're going to miss me.
All right, we are live. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Keeping Karlsson number 388.
Wow.
Being recorded a little early today on a
Special shout
Sunday.
out to anyone who's been here with us for all 388.
Is that your new thing this year? You're gonna say that for every show? That's like your joke. And then when it's Patron Cast 72, you're like, shout out to anyone who's been there for all other 71.
That's exactly, yeah, that's what I sound like on the Patron Cast for sure. And I feel like have I made that joke already?
Oh, many times. Is that a joke?
Have I made that comment? Well, you and I haven't even been here for all 388.
That's true. What's worse? Like, you're saying, like, I made fun of like, is it better to make fun of someone's voice using, like, that goofy, generic, like, goofy voice? Or is it worse if I tried to make fun of your voice by actually trying to imitate your voice? And then what if that was, like, more cutting, you know? Like, what if I, like, tried to be like, and then, you know, and then it was like that, and then, you know, you were to, like, is that me? And I'm like, I'm trying to be you. And you're like, that's how you think I sound? Like, I almost feel like it's better to just do a generic, goofy voice.
Yeah,
I don't
agree.
know. It'd be hard to do an impression of each other. I feel like you and I don't have the same, like, I don't know if I could do an impression of you if I wanted to.
Well, are you going to try right now?
Could you do an impression of me?
No.
I don't even know what it would be.
I'm feeling a little groggy. I got to be honest, just so you know, if I'm not feeling, no, I'm going to be ready for the show. But
the show's on. This is the show.
Oh, this is the show. the recorded podcast version of the show, which if you're listening, please do us a favor and download as well through, or listen through Spotify or a podcatcher, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts.
How many more can you name?
I got my booster yesterday, and it's having an impact.
Oh yeah, that's true. Okay, well, let's just knock this out then, so that you can go
I've been
rest.
saving up my energy all day for this one moment.
Okay, let's do it.
I thought I had something really great to say in the intro. Oh, okay. Well, the world is robbed of it. I forget.
Maybe you'll remember it sometime later.
Oh, I doubt it. All right, let's do this. Hello. Hey, Matt. Welcome to the chat. Happy New Year to you too. And hello to everybody watching. Elon, let's make the magic happen here.
Yes! Welcome everybody to another episode of the Keeping Karlsson Fantasy Hockey Podcast, the longest running fantasy hockey podcast in the world, hosted by two guys who are wishing you all a very happy new year and a year filled of your games for the players on your fantasy rosters actually being played. I am your host, Elon Dubrovsky, and with me, as always, to break down all of the action from the teams that played over the past week, my very good friend, the fantasy hockey robot himself, Brian Combe.
Hello, Elon. Hello, everybody. And yes, let's hope that we have a year ahead of chaos on the ice rather than off the ice. And the chaos on the ice in 2022 has already begun with that Wild Winter Classic St. Louis, Minnesota matchup. And now today, Pittsburgh had a double hat trick to beat San Jose 8-5. I think that they were way up. And then San Jose, I think, came within 2 goals. And then Pittsburgh put it to bed. But what a wild couple days. I could get used to this.
Yeah, there's been some fun hockey. It's almost like when the teams play a little badly, it makes for more fun games. I don't know. Maybe we should just go watch OHL games and start playing fantasy hockey for that. And maybe it would be more exciting.
I'm getting actually really beginning of season vibes from a lot of games right now. Like teams look sloppy, they look rusty. They're these crazy high scoring outings or like one-sided affairs like Toronto against Ottawa. Ottawa looked terrible in the game on Saturday night and Toronto looked ready to go. But this is the sort of thing that you expect when there's been a lot of inconsistency and no one's quite in their routine. And it's always a really fun time of year. So that's, for me, the silver lining right now is we get to open the season like a second time and enjoy all the fun and chaos that goes with it. And of course, we're here to unpack that chaos and tell you how you can play it to your advantage for your fantasy team's advantage and continue on your path to winning your league.
Yeah, exactly. By the way, you know who's not sloppy? I'm guessing, because I didn't watch the game, but Erik Karlsson, of all the players in this game, one of the few plus players. So for whatever that's worth, the other guys, you know, Brent Burns -2. I think when Erik Karlsson was on the ice, everything was cool. It was probably when he stepped off. It's like when the Sens made it to the conference finals against Pittsburgh, funnily enough. It was like when he's on the ice, things are cool. It's just like as soon as he steps off, everything falls apart. He's the best, Brian. I don't know. I feel like we need to do more to shout out how great Erik Karlsson is just to make up for these past couple of years where we were so sad about him. Every
Sure. Well,
opportunity I get.
you just took care of that, and he was in on the Sharks. Yeah, he was in on some of the Sharks scoring today. They were down 4-0, Elon, like 6 minutes into the game. Then it was 6-1. Then they got up to 6-5 with 15 minutes left in the third, and then with 2 minutes left, Evan Rodriguez scored his hat trick. And then with 10 seconds left, Brian Rust, the newly returned Brian Rust, the newly outured Brian Rust, scored his hat trick. Wild.
Yes. What a game. Okay, so we'll get actually to the Penguins in a little bit. We're going to start the show on a bit of a down note, though. But actually, before that, let's do an up note and sort of set the table for what we're doing here. So, first of all, Keeping Karlsson is proudly presented by DobberHockey.com. It's a new year, but DobberHockey.com there's nothing new about it except for the new content they throw at us every single day. But it's the same old great site where it's the place to be for anything fantasy hockey. It's where I go every day to start my day. You read the daily ramblings. Then, as I'm like preparing for my leagues and preparing for these shows, I go to Frozen Pool, which has all the greatest tools. So it's great. Dobberhockey.com. Check it out. The plan for today's show is actually Brian and I have got half a show's worth of content, but I think we're going to cram a lot in here. And then actually yesterday, I recorded a joint episode with the Fantasy Hockey Life guys, Victor and Jesse, and then Ben Burnett from Short Shifts joined me. So it was the four of us, and we did a draft of players that are 50% rostered or lower on Fantrax, and we each drafted one player per team. It was a really fun draft, and so the end of this episode is going to be the first half of that draft, and then you'll be able to go and download the Fantasy Hockey Life episode to get the second half of that draft. So Brian and I are going to talk for a bit, then we're going to do an ad, then we're going to cut to that draft, and that's the plan. We're going to have a lot of fun. But Brian, like I said, I'm going to start this portion of the show on a bit of a down note because we do have to discuss how all these games are being postponed in the future. At least it's like not like last minute. At least we have some time to prepare. I guess that's some small silver lining. But like the main thing is a bunch of Canadian teams are postponing games over the next couple of weeks because of these attendance restrictions. I guess they want to have the games later when they can have more people in the stands. Definitely you'll want to check out the schedule before you make any moves. Make sure it's an updated schedule like the one at keepingkarlsson.com/tools. It's a spreadsheet that I keep updating. Because if you're going to stream in a player, you're going to want to make sure that they're actually going to play the games you're expecting them to. As far as players you already have on your rosters, this is always a tough time, right? If you have a player that's not going to be playing very much for the next little while, you have to make that decision of do you hold because they're too good to drop, or do you consider like trading them, or do you just drop them and, you know, suck it up and just be sad that you had to drop a guy because their schedule's bad, even though you would have rather had them in your lineup. Obviously, I guess it's the same old advice, right? Like if you need to win now, then you probably need to consider shaking things up even though you don't want to. But if you're in a good spot, like we say this all the time, if you're in a good spot, then maybe you hold on or maybe even try to trade for some of these players with bad schedules because you could get them at a discount. Brian, do you have like any general advice regarding like what's going on here? Like specifically the Habs and the Islanders play 0 times next week. You're getting no games from your Habs and Islanders. The Kraken and the Canucks only play once, and then there's a few other teams playing twice. So I'm curious to know if you have any new nuggets for people of what they can do if they're in this situation.
Yeah, so if you're trying to figure out what to do with a guy who's not going to be playing games for your team, I have a few pieces of advice, and some of it is about the player and some of it is about your team. The player, you know, if it's a guy on the bottom half of your roster and you need to win weeks and compete, you should definitely strongly consider dropping because this player also probably isn't going to be that appealing to other teams unless they're coasting and cruising at the top half of the standings, in which case, if it's a guy in the bottom half of your roster, maybe it's someone who might not crack theirs. So that's one thing to consider. You also need to look at your opponent for the upcoming weeks if you're playing head to head and see what their situation is. Like if your number of games played in the weeks that these Canadian teams or the Islanders or the Kraken aren't getting a lot of games in, if your games played is already way above or way below your opponent's totals, then dropping, you know, Noah Dobson or I don't know, Bo Horvat or Connor Garland, that's less likely to make a big dent in the outcome of your matchup here. So, like, you need to consider, again, like the general advice for me is when it's about the player, you need to ask, okay, are there similar players available in free agency to the guy I'm dropping? And are these guys ever available at other times of year? Those are the big questions for me about trying to figure out, okay, if I let go of this guy, is he going to get added by one of my competitors? And then the second piece about your team is you need to ask, like, is that roster spot that you're clearing going to make or break your week? If you clear it or if you waste it on a guy who's not playing. And then the follow-up to that is, do you need this week's results to make or break your fantasy playoff positioning? And the answer to those questions is going to help guide you on whether or not to, say, oh no, I have to cut ties with all these bubble guys on Canadian teams that like may be good enough for my roster, but I'm not sure long term if they're holds. You might have to cut ties with them today if you're in a super competitive situation, or you can hold on to them if you're not. And again, a lot depends on how attractive they're going to be to other people in your league and your games played next week. So, you're going to have to do a little bit of your homework and research to figure out, especially the games played piece. But that's going to be the big guidance. I think, Elon, like we're going to be talking a lot about specific players and names, and we'll talk about sort of their long-term outlooks. But for you and your fantasy team, your own personal team, those are the guiding questions that you have to answer as we talk about these guys' long-term outlooks.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice. Actually looking at your matchups and seeing how much it's going to help or hurt you to lose a couple of games. Maybe it's on the other side also. If you look and you realize you're going to lose by a lot regardless, then might as well hold on to the players and, stock up for the future. And yeah, the only other advice I'd give is like if you have a player that you're thinking of dropping, definitely first see if you can at least trade him, right? If you come to the conclusion that you need to drop, but it's a good player, then yeah, might as well see if there's a market. Like we're going to talk about Ilya Sorokin, and maybe you're going to decide I just can't afford to hold this guy, but I'm sure that there'll be someone who will want to take him off your hands. But let's get to some of these specific bad scheduled players. I've got 3 here that I wanted to ask you about that. I don't know. I'm just kind of curious to see what you think about them. Like you said, like we're going to talk about them long term, and that can maybe help guide people in their decisions about these guys. I want to start on the Islanders, who don't play any times next week, like we've discussed, and actually don't even play until Thursday of the following week. So it's like a 10-day layoff, just brutal. And they already had that bad schedule early in the season. Remember where they had 2 one-game weeks? So it's just been rough sledding for people having Islanders on their teams. But yeah, we got to talk about one of the hottest D-men in the league right now, Noah Dobson. He's finally started to produce like we were hoping he would when he took over that top power play job with Leddy out of the picture. So Dobson is a 2018 12th overall pick, and he's just come off an amazing month. 10 points in his last 10 games, including 2 straight 1 goal and 1 assist games on this past Thursday and Saturday versus Buffalo and Edmonton. And in the 3-2 win over Edmonton yesterday, Dobson also took 5 shots, blocked 3 shots. So just a fantastic performance for his fantasy managers all across the board. But now, like I said, he doesn't play until Thursday the 13th. I'm sure I'm not alone. Like as someone, like in one of my leagues, I added Dobson, think around the start of the month. Lucky for me, like thinking he'd just be a streamer. And now if he feels like a hold, but at the same time, I always have that thought in my head, like, but I did just add him like originally as a streamer. My plan was never to hold him long term. So it kind of makes me wonder if maybe that's going to be a reason why it's okay to drop him. But of course, that might be a big mistake. So I guess my question to you is how for real is this run that he's on? Like, is it possible maybe that this uptick has a lot to do with Ryan Pulock being out of the picture, and once Ryan Pulock returns, then Dobson will fall back to earth, or maybe I'll put it another way. We've got with the Islanders, probably most people are saying if they're not named Barzal and they're not a goalie, then you definitely just want to drop them for the short stretch. Is like Dobson in that Barzal territory right now where he's just too good to drop and you have to hold on?
For Dobson, I think we need to look at why all of a sudden he's doing so much better than he was at the start of the season and last year. Because the one material change that I can find is that Ryan Pulock is not in the picture. When Pulock was in the lineup, Dobson had no goals and 3 assists for 3 points over 11 games, just 18 shots, so like a shot and a half-ish per game, and averaging only 18 minutes of ice time per night. Without Pulock in the lineup, it's very clear that Dobson has been asked to step right up. In 15 games since Pulock has been out, Dobson has 11 points in those 15 games, 5 goals and 6 assists, 38 shots. So that's coming up on 2.5 shots per game and 22 minutes on average of time on ice per night, including 6 of Dobson's last 10 games. He's seen 22 or more minutes of ice and as many as 26 minutes of ice. So that's huge for Noah Dobson, who hadn't been seeing those numbers pre-Pulock's injury. In that 10-game run with that especially high time on ice, Pulock has also been on a very particularly good run. 5 goals, 5 assists for 10 points in 10 games. Those 5 goals have come on 27 shots for Dobson, which means his shooting percentage is over 18%, which is high even for a forward. So some of this is more than we can expect, but still, if you take 2 or 3 goals, or maybe 4 if you want to, still Dobson could, without those extra goals that he might be scoring, have 6 or 7 points in his last 10 games, and that is nothing to sneeze at. And along with those goals that Dobson is scoring, he has 3 power play assists, which is really nice. And this is one thing that I think is definitely a result of Ryan Pulock being out. Dobson's share of power play time has grown from roughly 50% to a pretty dominant majority share of the Isles power play time. Dobson is now seeing up in the 70 to 80% range of the Isles power play time, which makes sense, right? Because maybe they thought with Pulock and Dobson, they could quarterback 2 units and do fairly well. But now maybe they just lean a little more on the Dobson unit, which is not something the Isles have done for several years. So it's refreshing to see them do now. Dobson, it's funny because I had the exact same thought as you did. Everyone on the Isles except Barzal is droppable. And Dobson was the guy who I'm like, oh, but maybe not this time, because my line on Dobson so far this year he's been a roughly 40-point player with low numbers in the peripheral categories, but now we're seeing consistently good shot numbers. The block numbers have continued to be good and increased scoring from Dobson's power play role. So I'm happy to edit my take on Dobson, and I'm not going to boost him up a ton, but would say 45 to 50 points with meaningful peripheral contributions is in the works for Dobson here if he keeps getting the minutes and role that he has. Of course, the other piece to that puzzle, whether Dobson is going to keep getting this deployment, is Ryan Pulock and when he's back, because from my read on Islanders management, they seem to be creatures of habit, right? So I'd venture to guess that things swing back at least partially, if not fully, to the way they were to begin the season when Pulock and Dobson were both healthy, which means Dobson might lose some power play time and some 5-on-5 time too, while Pulock comes back to shoulder the similar load that he was shouldering through the first 10 or 11 games of the Islanders season. The latest on Ryan Pulock came last week from Andrew Gross, who reported that Lou Lamoriello said Pulock was skating and feeling better with no timetable, but the initial timetable said 4 to 6 weeks, and it's been 6 weeks now, and now we have 2 more weeks for Pulock to heal. I assume he's back, which means that Dobson's value is diminished, and so this is all to say, if you can't afford to hold on to Dobson, that's a shame, but I think he's a drop if that roster spot is going to make the difference between a win and a loss, and one you might not like seriously regret. I think you can drop him without being terrified that you're going to regret losing him for the rest of the season in a less competitive setting. Like if you're cruising in first, or, you can handle 2 weeks of no games. Yeah, Dobson could be worth a hold, but he also may not pay off for you in a few weeks when the Islanders are playing games again, the same way he's paid off for you in the last few.
Oh, I don't know. You have more guts than me. I definitely cannot come on this pod and tell people to drop Dobson. You know that's going to potentially lead to people being like, this terrible podcast just told me to drop point per game defenseman over the past month that's finally found his stride, 22 years old or whatever it is.
I'm just giving permission because
high pedigree prospect.
The last time the Islanders had such little such a weak schedule, we said it was okay to drop him. And I'm saying I don't know that enough has materially changed. Like, yes, he's on a scoring run, but I can see why. Like he's scoring on too many shots, and he has a greater role because Ryan Pulock isn't in the lineup. And I don't think he's going to keep scoring on the same amount of shots he takes. And I think Pulock's going to be back.
Right. Okay. It's all fair.
So, great. If I had him in Cupful, Elon, I'm going to be honest, I would have a hard time dropping him. I have Sorokin in the Cupful, and that's the Keeping Karlsson Ultimate Patron Fantasy League, kkupfl.com. I have Sorokin. I had Varlamov. I dropped him already the instant I heard about this news. He's gone. I think Sorokin is borderline droppable too, especially because he's only if you're in a volume league, I think I'm saying this, I'm diminishing my own assets worth, unfortunately, but I think it's true. If you're in a rates league, I think you're good. Like Sorokin still should be able to help you there with save percentage and goals against, but man, he's a tough hold right now in a volume format.
Yeah, well, the reason is because for a while, Sorokin was looking great because he was playing a lot more than Varlamov because Varlamov wasn't doing well. But it's kind of almost bad news all around for fantasy for these goalies that just before this long rest, Varlamov has started to find his game. His last 2 games versus Boston and Buffalo have been really good. And, we predicted when we did that Schmore Goalies Board mid-season show a couple weeks ago, we talked about how we're probably going to see the Islanders go back to 50-50 if they can, if Varlamov is up for it. And now it's looking like he is. And so, yeah, if Sorokin's only going to be a 50-50 guy, that can be a frustrating person to hold in normal circumstances, let alone in circumstances where he's not going to be playing for a while. Of course, when he does play, he's great. So it's really tough. I'm just going to amend what you said and say, for these guys like Sorokin and Dobson, at least try. If you're desperate and you need to win these next couple of weeks, at least try to trade them. Work really hard at it. Don't drop these amazing assets unless you're sure that you've knocked on all the doors. And if you've knocked on all the doors and no one's interested, hey, then maybe there's a chance you can drop him and then add him back. Like maybe cut it halfway. Be like, he doesn't play for 10 days. How about I'm going to drop him and I'm going to add him in 5 days if no one's added him yet. And so you're playing a little bit of chicken, but you could maybe get a couple games extra before you come back and then hold him for, a couple games that you lose.
So the other managers in my couple division have been receiving several offers. Like I'm just tossing them out for Sorokin, like seeing if anybody else wants to take him on. And I think maybe my position on Dobson and Sorokin reflects like I'm in a dogfight in the middle of the standings right now in Tier 2 Ottawa of the cupful. Like I'm having a rough go. And so I can't afford these 2 weeks to just lose games. And if I was in a more comfortable place, I would be happier to hang on to Dobson. But I like your advice, Elon, that like at least try and trade, see if somebody's willing to take that guy on, and then maybe they see they can reap the rewards in a couple weeks if they can hang on then. But right now, yeah, maybe you're hearing the outcome of me not feeling like I'm able to hang on 2 weeks with no games from Sorokin or Dobson.
Yeah, that's fair. Obviously, then it gets tougher if it's a keeper league. But anyway, all right. Speaking of guys that are valuable in keeper leagues, probably, but really tough holds right now, let's go to the Habs. I think that probably at this point, there's no one to hold on the Habs except for one person. Like, kind of luckily, all the other good players, Carey Price, Mike Hoffman, Tyler Toffoli, even Brendan Gallagher, they're all injured right now. So hopefully you can just stash these guys in your IR and not have to, even stress about it. But one guy who's healthy and just not going to play for a while is Nick Suzuki, who just scored a goal versus Florida on Saturday. So that's great. But that broke a 6-game pointless streak. Brian, was that goal from Nick Suzuki enough of a sign that he's going to get going again after the break, that he's someone that people should hold? Or is he one of these people that you'd be okay with cutting bait on if you had him on your cupful team?
I really doubt this week of no games should be the tipping point for any Nick Suzuki managers. Like, I would hope you've made up your mind already about whether you should deal with.
No, you tell us. We're waiting for you to tell us what to do.
Okay, well, if you've put up with him all season long, what's another couple weeks is my short answer. If you're looking for something really exciting to come from Nick Suzuki, we should be seeing better than we've seen so far. Like Suzuki's currently on a 46-point pace, which is low, but it's not as low. Like it shouldn't be. Sorry, which is low, but it's not so low, considering how Suzuki and Montreal have been playing. Like I wouldn't want to be expecting more than a 55, 60-point pace rest of season from Suzuki. I think because of I think his upside is higher than Dobson. It sounds like you might disagree, Elon. And I think that makes Suzuki holdable. Like when you were like, oh, I don't want to be the podcast that tells people to drop this really exciting young prospect, Noah Dobson, getting a look with this unknown upside. I still think Suzuki's upside is higher than Dobson's because it's hard to have high upside on the New York Islanders. So I think that's why I would hold Suzuki. If I had to choose to drop one of Suzuki and Dobson, I would let go of Dobson. But I'm just going to say, like, yeah, I think in leagues where you've waited this long, where Suzuki has essentially not been playing for like stretches of games at a time based on his production, if you've put up with that and you're waiting for that 55 to 60 point upside to bear out, yeah, you can wait for it. Keep waiting. It's going to hurt you for the next week or so. And it might hurt you beyond that because Suzuki isn't able to find his game as much as he should. But I could see him being pacing for about 10 more points the rest of the way, comparing to his 46-point pace that he's been on so far.
I see. Okay. I guess with Suzuki, at least the thing with him is if you drop him, there's a better chance I think that he doesn't get added. So you could try to get him back later if you really believe. Like you're saying that you don't believe that Dobson has much of a chance to produce on the Islanders. I feel like right now it's harder to produce on Montreal than on the Islanders. Though, of course, there may be some reinforcements coming. Like we said, like a bunch of players are injured. They've been playing basically with their AHL lineup for a lot of these past games. So maybe things can get better. But throughout the season, it hasn't been great. Like in a keeper league, I like Suzuki long term. I think he's like a great player. Like I don't think he's lost his skill, but I could see things just not working out in Montreal. It's already been half a year. So these are tough decisions, I guess, but I would be a lot more comfortable telling people to drop Nick Suzuki at this point. And maybe it's just because he's on a cold streak, so it's like more obvious. Like at the start of the year, for sure, I would have agreed with you that Suzuki seemed like the higher upside guy. We were all super excited about him. But hey, we were also excited about Jeff Petrie, and now he's in everyone's waiver wires and no one cares.
Right. Jeff Petrie is obviously like still a drop too, especially now. If you've been holding him this long, now this is your sign that you really need to let go.
I don't think there's anyone who's listening to us that's held him like
Yeah.
because it's unless it's like a brand new listener, then this is their first episode, and then welcome, and then like yeah, definitely you should be dropping Jeff Petrie a long time ago. Okay, so Brian, that's it for the schedule talk. Okay, let's have some happy news now. Let's switch over and have a good time. Talk about some oucheries. Let's go to Toronto. Okay, they had a long layoff, not having played since December 14th, and they've got some more postponed games coming up. I said this is gonna be happy news. So all this time off has helped the team get healthy, and they were basically in full force on Saturday versus Matt Murray and the Sens when they gave the Sens quite the shellacking to the tune of a 6-0 dominant victory. So Mitch Marner was back in his spot on the top line with Matthews and Bunting, a line that was actually kept quiet in that game. So I'm sure I was hanging out with my brother last night, and he has Matthews on his team. It was in a close matchup, and he was really disappointed that Toronto kept scoring and Matthews wasn't getting in on anything. So sorry, Joel. But William Nylander also returned from the COVID protocol, and he joined Tavares and Kerfoot on the second line, and Nylander did not pull a Matthews. He scored a couple goals. So last time we talked about the Leafs, a few weeks ago, when there were these injuries, we were talking about Andre Kasha and how sweet of a spot he was in with Matthews. I assume that we should just say now that Kasha is a drop, as he was yesterday just like a line 3 power play 2 guy. He did have a power play assist on Makheyev's goal, but you can't expect that to be sustainable production. So Brian, what's our updated take now on these guys like Kasha, but then probably more interestingly, these top sixers that are now finally back with their studs, and Bunting playing with Matthews and Marner, and then Kerfoot playing with Nylander and Tavares. Like, so Kerfoot made a very great case for himself. He had 3 assists versus the Sens yesterday. He was pointless in 6 games before that, but again, how much do you really read into it when he wasn't playing with these stud players? And then Bunting, yeah, pointless in his last 4, but you've got to imagine that Austin Matthews won't be going scoreless very often, and when he does get points, Bunting is now there, and he was on a good run before Marner got injured before. So Brian, let's say we had to rank these 3 guys that are like periphery, that are these periphery guys on the Leafs getting exposure to good players. So Bunting, Kerfoot, and Andre Kasha for legacy reasons. How would you rank these guys and your interest in picking them up soon?
Well, I think Kasha is probably the lowest of the bunch. He saw his time on ice drop from the high teens to just 15 minutes on Saturday night. And that's with 4 minutes of power play time from the second unit. To Kasha's credit, even with diminished ice time, he still picked up 4 shots and an assist. And I think probably that power play time helped him with at least one of those shots and that assist, the point that Kasha actually put up. Toronto actually saw nearly 10 minutes with the man advantage and lots of it with the lead. So, I'm definitely not expecting Kasha to still find so much power play time on ice, which is a reason to drop him. He's not going to see meaningful power play time. He's not going to be in the top 6. So he's at the bottom of this list. Bunting and Kerfoot, both these guys are frustrating. Like, we were hoping that at least one of them could do a serviceable Zach Hyman impression in Toronto, but they're alternating between one of them is Zach Hyman and the other is Zach Kassian, on and off between them. Like, between Bunting and Kerfoot, they've had these great week winning runs and then other miserable stretches of silence where they lack even peripheral contributions. And so if I had to rate them, I think I'd put Bunting up ahead of Kerfoot just because he seems to find some way to contribute more often, at least in the shots. Like Kerfoot, when he's not doing anything, you see a lot of zeros in his cupful stats or 0.5s or 1 points, like very minimal contributions. I think Kerfoot's floor is lower than Bunting's, and I don't think their offensive upside is much different from one another. Like in my couple division, Bunting and Kerfoot have been in and out of free agency plenty through the season. Kerfoot has been a free agent more often than Bunting, but that tells me, if you're looking at this week ahead with no games played for Toronto, or one potentially, it means if I let them go now, I could still get another shot at them, and maybe no one else is going to race to pick them up. So I'm not sure, Elon, if you asked me if you drop Kerfoot and Bunting, I think I would, even if you didn't ask, and I'd rank them Bunting, then Kerfoot, then Kasha, if I'm looking for a player for the rest of the season.
Okay, yeah. So as of now, the schedule is the Leafs actually are scheduled to play twice next week, against Edmonton on Wednesday and Colorado on Saturday. So maybe that Edmonton game gets canceled. We'll have to wait and see, or I should say postponed, not canceled. But yeah, I think I'm going to agree with you with that ranking. If you do want to have one of these Leafs, I think Bunting, just also because he's had more success earlier in the year, and Matthews Marner, just, a little bit better than Tavares Nylander. As much as I love Nylander, I have Nylander in a couple of my leagues, and he's been a revelation. What a great pick by me. Thanks, Elon. one. Okay, so next up, let's go. I'm being such a loser. Sorry. Let's go to Columbus now. So we're doing outjuries as a reminder, and we got to talk about Patrick Laine, who returned for the Blue Jackets on Thursday versus Nashville, had a big game, scored a goal, took 7 shots. He was quieter on Saturday. He went pointless with only 2 shots versus Carolina in that brutal 7-4 loss where Columbus blew that 4-0 lead. So Laine's been lining up like right back on the top line with Jenner and Voracek, also playing with those guys, and Nyquist and Werenski on the top power play. Overall, you look at the season numbers, Laine's only played 11 games, but he has 11 points those 11 games. So he's kind of reminding me a lot like Tarasenko, right? Someone who we once saw as this big star. Then he disappointed us big time recently, leading to him being a draft steal for anyone who grabbed him in drafts this year. Both Laine and Tarasenko clearly went a lot lower than they should have based on the results so far. Now, though, people are super high on Laine again. We had one question in our Discord. Someone was asking about Laine versus like Kirill Kaprizov. I think it was this person had Kaprizov and got an offer of Laine and some other pieces. But I was then just made me really think, like, how good is Laine, right? Are we thinking of him as back to being that like 76-point pace guy from 2019-20, or even like the 40-plus goal guy that we expected him to be year in, year out when he first broke into the league? Or is he, still on Columbus and like, yeah, he's had a good 11 points in 11 games, but let's kind of hold our horses. And maybe he's not as bad as last year, but maybe not as good as this like stud that he's showing up as so far through 11 games.
I think that last descriptor was probably the better one, Elon, which shouldn't surprise anyone, right? It's been a long time since we've seen Patrick Laine look as dangerous as he did in his early seasons when he looked like this consistent threat to score 40 goals. But it's really nice to see that Patrick Laine doesn't look as bad as he looked last year. This season for Laine in Columbus, he's only played 11 games, but in those 11 games, we've seen a return to form for Laine in a way. Last season, yeah, he looked awful. We don't need to get too back into that. Like he looked bad. There's no, like, it's not because of variance. It's not because, of any factor other than Patrick Laine was bad. It was a bad year for him. But again, not going to get too deep into that. Let's look at this season for Laine. He's played 5-on-5. It's settling in somewhere between where it was in his 50-point season and where it was in his 70-point seasons, which split the difference. That looks like 60 points. Of course, he's point per game through 11 games. That's much better than a 60-point pace. And I think that's partly in thanks to what's not just happening at 5-on-5 for Laine, but also on the power play, where Laine has 4 power play points in 11 games. That's a 30 power play point pace. And he's done that once in his career. The other seasons where Laine's seen similar deployment on the power play, both in percentage of timeshare that he gets for his team and also the amount of shooting he's doing, Laine's usually paced for about 20 power play points in this kind of look or role. It's really great, though, that Laine's getting tons of chances to shoot on the power play. He's basically the same. He's at where he was at his previous peak in Winnipeg on the power play. So combine that 5-on-5 and power play situation. Laine's back to 3 shots per game, healthy power play production, and seems to be working well enough with the line he's found himself on. I think this all puts us in like 60 to 70 point territory for Patrick Laine. I think 60 points is, like I said, splitting the difference, but I would lean based on what we're seeing in his numbers. I would lean to take the over on 60 rather than the under.
Okay, but still nothing close to Kaprizov, who's looking like above point per game. What do you think about my Laine versus Tarasenko comparison? Like, Tarasenko is also sitting at a point per game right now, just like Laine, though Tarasenko's played 3 times more games, and he currently is sitting on a streak of goals in 5 straight games. So just out of curiosity, is it close, or is it, like, obviously one or the other? Who would you rather have for the rest of the season between Laine and Tarasenko?
It's an interesting comparison. I mean, Tarasenko's still on the team that doesn't like him, where Laine's on the team that is like trying to learn to like him.
Are we sure that St. Louis still doesn't like him? I feel like maybe he's starting to make them like him with all these goals.
I mean, they must be. His deployment has definitely improved. Like, we saw the dislike or like disinterest in from St. Louis in Tarasenko pretty steadily early in the season when they were suppressing his ice time, but like you said, he's kind of forced their hand with all the goals he's scoring. Tarasenko looks fantastic. I'd rather him than Patrick Laine. He looks like he is like fully returned to his peak form, even though not long ago we considered Tarasenko playing on the third line. And now we're like, oh, well, actually, he's not on the third line because Robert Thomas is a top 6 centerman playing with Tarasenko. So now it's almost like there's 3 lines in the St. Louis. And so now it's almost like there's 3 top 6 lines. I mean, usually we call this a top 9, but Tarasenko's line is so good. I don't want to diminish them by calling them just a top nine. So yeah, I would prefer, even though Line A is the one getting true blue top line, top power play deployment, I think Tarasenko and what he's showing us this year is legit good enough to make up the difference between what his deployment has been and what Line A's has been, and to be the more preferred player on my depth chart.
Okay, yeah, no arguments for me. While we're in Columbus, though, another hot streak I want to get your take on is this Alexandre Texier run that was extended with his 1 goal, 1 assist game versus Carolina. Texier is now up to 9 points in his last 8 games from his line with Nyquist and Sean Corrali. Texier doesn't even get power play time on the top power play or the second power play. He's just been doing this all at even strength, which on one hand is like impressive, but on the other hand makes it a little bit hard to believe in him being able to, sustain this production. He's not playing with the most exciting players. He doesn't get power play time, but at the same time, he keeps getting points all the time. So is this the kind of thing where people need to be rushing to grab Texier if he's still available? Or are you, skeptical that he'll be able to keep this up?
I mentioned Alex Texier. By the way, I hope everyone enjoyed the snippet of the Patron cast that we released last week. And if you're interested in becoming a patron, you still can, and listen to the whole thing. If you listen to the whole thing, you'll hear that there was a spot in it where we were talking about Alex Texier. I brought him up as somebody who, I'm trying to ignore, but I just can't. I'm trying to ignore him for the reasons you said, Elon, because, I keep looking at Texier and his deployment and thinking, no way. I wish I had him on my roster for that last game or those last couple where he did well, but it's not going to continue. And then Texier keeps producing, even though there's not a ton of opportunity being allowed to him with his deployment. Still more deployment now, though, than there was at the start of the season. I don't know if you remember, Elon, but Texier at the start of the year began with bottom 6 deployment. He was barely seeing 13 minutes a night over his first 10 contests. Since then, Texier in 21 games is averaging 16 minutes a night and has 17 points and 41 shots. So a couple shots a game and 17 points in 21 games is really, really fantastic. Of course, not all of this is sustainable. His shooting percentage is on ice. His shooting percentage and his on-ice shooting percentage and his points participation rates all a little to moderately high in this run that Texier's on. So he's not going to keep it up, but he's in a top 6 role right now. Even with no power play time, there's a shot he can stick around at a 50 to 55 point pace. Unfortunately, there's not even power play time that we can look forward to, though, and say, well, maybe there's a chance, because that top power play in Columbus, assuming everyone stays healthy, is pretty locked down. There's no way for Texier. There's no apparent way for Texier to wiggle his way into it. So I think
well,
Texier,
hey, maybe second power play at least could be available to him.
Yeah, right, because he's not even getting that. But the second power play in Columbus doesn't see a whole lot of action and isn't that exciting. So I just kind of wrote that off entirely. I think so. This is all to say, I think Texier is probably a good guy to go and get and see how long he can do this. Consider him a short-term stream. But at some point, he's not going to keep putting up 17 points over 21 games, which has been a lot of fun. But it's not going to last quite this way. But again, we could expect a 50-point pace rest of season, maybe 55 if things break well.
Okay, yeah, I'm with you. I don't know. I guess I'm just a stickler for at least some power play time and a decent pair of line mates. I'd probably even take a Bunting over a Texier. Obviously, the schedule takes precedence. Yeah. Okay, so then one more outjury. Let's go to Pittsburgh, where we actually have a bunch of outjuries from one team. So lucky for them, they got both Brian Rust and Jake Gensel back today for that crazy game against the Sharks that we already discussed. And apparently, Evgeny Malkin is going to be coming back soon. Maybe by the time you listen to this, we'll be having news that Malkin's back for the next game. As far as today's game, like you said, Rust obviously had a great return. He had a hat trick. Also, Evan Rodriguez had a hat trick. This guy just keeps on producing and being so good. At the start of the year, I wouldn't have expected there to be room for Evan Rodriguez in the top 6, right? I would have thought it's going to be, Crosby. I thought it was going to be Crosby, Rust, and Gensel, and then Malkin with Kapanen and Zucker, and that would be it. And then maybe Jeff Carter would sneak his way in sometime if there's an injury. So I would have thought back when Evan Rodriguez was doing so well at the start of the season, I just thought, yeah, it's great while it lasts, but he's not going to be able to hold this role. So far, he's been in the top 6 the whole time and producing. At some point, all these people are going to be healthy, or I guess it's the Penguins, so that might not be the case. But I'm just curious, do you think the Pens are like seeing enough from him that he's like earned his way to not be in the bottom six. Like when everyone's healthy, maybe it's like Kasperi Kapanen or Jason Zucker that goes down and just Evan Rodriguez stays in the top six and keeps producing. Like, should people be at this point thinking of him? Yeah, this is like a long-term hold for me this season. I don't have to worry about having to drop Evan Rodriguez at some point or trying to sell high. I feel like if we told people to sell high earlier in the year, they might be mad at us now, thinking that, oh man, he's definitely kept up what he was doing at the start.
When we've talked about Evan Rodriguez earlier this year, it's been exactly what you said, which is that we think he's actually good. Like Evan Rodriguez on this podcast, even when he was in Buffalo, we said he looked actually good, but he couldn't hold on to top six in Buffalo. But to his credit, very few players actually look good in Buffalo, and Evan Rodriguez was able to do that over the last few seasons. So good on him, and good on him for making the most of his opportunities in Pittsburgh. It is hard to believe there's room for Rodriguez in the top six once everybody's healthy. But my counter argument to that is that Malkin with Zucker and Kapanen, like Zucker and Kapanen, I don't think have done a whole lot to justify playing on Malkin's line. They've had the opportunity. They haven't done much with it. At least from a fantasy's perspective, I don't see why not let Evan Rodriguez continue to get some time, because he's been actually good this year in Pittsburgh. 9 shots a few games ago, 6 shots tonight. He's got 3.5 shots per game, averaging 17.5 minutes, which is by far a career high of time on ice per night. I really want this guy to get an opportunity. He's 28 already. So, we're not about to see, like, if we see a breakout, it's not because he's found a new gear. It's just because he's never had the opportunity. We're seeing him get the opportunity. We're seeing Rodriguez take advantage of it. And I would be much more interested in rostering him on the second line than I currently am in Zucker and Kapanen.
Yeah, I wonder if this is a rare case where you can try to do a buy high. There's probably people who have Rodriguez on their team that are just thinking, man, I really need to try to sell him before the bottom falls out. And now his value's so high. Now's my chance. And so maybe you can make an offer of like, I mean, obviously you have to pick the right player, maybe a Nick Suzuki in a 1-year league, someone that people would have expected to be so much better. And then maybe you'll be able to pull something off. Because I think I'm with you. Like at this point, why wouldn't the Penguins, like I'm not saying he's going to continue to be this good, but why wouldn't the Penguins continue to give him this prominent role? And you'd think like things could only get better. He's going to have Malkin. I guess it'll be harder to hold the top power play spot, but he's been really good, and I'm very impressed. It's starting to become a pretty decent size sample size. Okay, let's switch over to injuries now. On short shifts, Lewis and I talked about how Mike Smith was back after 2 straight games that he played. I suggested you could probably dump Koskinen. Like I said, Smith will likely get the majority of the games moving forward, and this was obviously, or maybe bad advice, because Mike Smith then got injured at the end of that game that was on when we started the recording. So now we have no word yet on how long he's going to be out, which is a real bummer because Mike Smith had that great start to the year. He came back for these couple games. He actually didn't look that great, but I assumed it was just shaking off the rust or whatever. But now, who knows? Maybe this is the kind of thing that could end up keeping him out for the rest of the time. Like maybe he aggravated something. I haven't heard too much about what's wrong with Mike Smith. But in the meantime, like I almost feel like gross asking, but like I guess do we have to tell people to go pick up Mikko Koskinen again if he was dropped? Like he's just been so bad that I don't want to recommend picking up Koskinen, but this is fantasy hockey. You need a goalie. He's probably now the starting goalie again. Or I guess if Smith is out long term, we get back to Stuart Skinner going back and forth. Yeah. Like what do you do? I don't know. You tell me. Anything? Just like leave these guys.
Well, your line in the past has been that when we were talking about Koskinen, the line was that an Edmonton goalie, even if they give up 4 goals a night, still has a decent chance of winning, which makes them rosterable. And now we see Edmonton has lost 9 of their last 11. So that hasn't even been true. And part of that is because of Koskinen not being great in net, or Skinner or Smith. Also, the offense isn't quite firing on all cylinders. In this losing streak, Edmonton is shooting just 7.6%. So their luck is going to turn somewhat on the shooting and offensive front. But it's hard to say the Oilers' luck in the crease is going to turn. And I kind of think you hit the nail on the head with, saying, should we just go ahead and add Koskinen? Or what about Skinner? I mean, Skinner's got a 916 this year compared to Koskinen's 902. And I don't think Mikko Koskinen is the auto ad here. He was the 1A to Skinner's 1B, and Skinner was coming off of back-to-back starts when Mike Smith returned. So I don't think I rush out and grab Koskinen because I think he's going to get the lion's share of starts. I might stream him in for a spot, but I'm not looking at Koskinen thinking he's going to be the lockdown number 1 goalie. And even if he is, I'm not sure he's going to help my team in that role. So you're kind of stuck. Now, with Smith out, at least if you're in a league where you're desperate for goaltending, it opens up the possibility that you can get starts from Koskinen or Skinner, but to get results from them is going to be maybe a bigger ask. And frankly, I would rather Skinner over Koskinen.
Yeah, so there you go. It's the kind of thing where, yeah, maybe they'll have good results, maybe they won't, but it'll also be so frustrating because you won't know who's going to be playing until the day of the game. So it's not an exciting situation in the Edmonton net right now.
Also,
There,
keep in
yeah,
mind if they don't end up playing for a week or so, that might be enough time for Mike Smith to become like game ready again.
hopefully, yeah, I'd like
Yeah,
that. I've got
hopefully.
Smith in one of my leagues. I'm actually in this really frustrating situation. I'm in a league where there's a maximum of 4 goalies. Like you're not allowed. Like, you have to drop a goalie if you're above 4, and you're not allowed to stash people in IR. It's like a serious league. You can't do shady things. And so I had Mike Smith. Then he got injured. I ended up adding Wedgwood out of free agency, who hasn't been that great, but this league counts saves. So I was happy to get the starts. Then Smith came back, so I was forced to get rid of Wedgwood. I traded him for like peanuts. And now, like, Smith is injured again, and I don't have him or Wedgwood. So now I'm down a goalie. Very frustrating. But what
Very
can you do?
frustrating. I'm sorry to hear that. I'm in a league that doesn't have enough IR spots. There's 3 IR spots total. Mike Smith has been sitting in one, taking one up for so long, came back for 2 games, did nothing for me, back on it. I don't have the space. So I'm actually, as a Mike Smith guy, trying to figure out, do I even hold Mike Smith at this point? Because we did raise the concern when he was injured that, like, hey, he's an old guy recovering from this injury, might throw off whatever magic was happening before he was hurt. And now I just don't know, but he's still the de facto starter in Edmonton if he's healthy. So that's what I'm resting my laurels on here.
Yeah. Okay, so there's more injuries actually in Edmonton. Unfortunately, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins missed Saturday's game with a lower body injury. He's headed back to Edmonton to be evaluated. In his absence in yesterday's game, Devon Shore was the replacement, playing with Draisaitl and Yamamoto on the second line. Oilers didn't have a power play in that game, so we didn't get to see who takes Ryan Nugent-Hopkins' top power play spot. I'd imagine it would probably be Yamamoto. He was already there when Puljujarvi was out recently, and actually Yamamoto went on a nice run of 2 goals and 3 assists in 3 games, capped by a big game versus the Devils on Friday. So, Brian, I'm not going to waste everyone's time asking you about Devon Shore, but if Ryan Nugent-Hopkins is out long term, is this a good news or bad news for Yamamoto? Because on one hand, he loses a good line mate, but on the other hand, I think it would only make sense that it could be Puljujarvi, Yamamoto, and then McDavid and Draisaitl with the defenseman on that top power play. So maybe this actually could end up being good for Yamamoto, and maybe he'll be able to keep that recent run going a little bit.
You say Yamamoto is losing a good line mate, which is true, but even with that good line mate, Yamamoto is pacing for 28 points this season, with the only ray of sunshine coming recently, where finally he's gone on a little run. Yamamoto with 5 points in his last 4 games, including 2 goals. So that's been exciting to see, really the only burst of production from Yamamoto this year. But that's why maybe I'm not that concerned that Ryan Nugent-Hopkins is out, because that didn't seem to be giving Yamamoto a whole lot of opportunity to score anyway. But maybe it can help overall, because Ryan Nugent-Hopkins has 14 power play points in 30 games. They're all assists. So if Yamamoto does get to step into that role and the power play runs similarly, there could be points up for grabs there for Yamamoto. So if Edmonton plays their games this week, I'd be up for streaming in Yamamoto to see what happens, especially because of this little 5-on-5 run that he's on as well. Yeah, like we've talked about him earlier in the season as somebody you can drop and forget about, and like it's just not going to happen for Kyler Yamamoto this season. But this gives you a reason to just take a fresh look at him and say you have someone available on the Oilers' top power play, which could yield some points.
Yeah. Also, I'll just throw this out there, and I have no idea if this is the case, but I could imagine if you have a line with Draisaitl, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, and Yamamoto, maybe Draisaitl first chooses to pass to RNH and vice versa, and not looking at Yamamoto maybe as much. So maybe now it actually is good for him at even strength. And now, like, when Draisaitl has the puck and he needs to dish it, he's not going to go to Devon Shore. So maybe Yamamoto ends up taking more shots and being more involved with the play. So we'll have to see how that shakes out.
That's a great thought, Elon. I would love to see it bear out. We'll see. Yeah, you can just hear, I think, my overall lack of confidence in Yamamoto. I mean, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins hasn't been lighting it up at even strength either. 12 points in 30 games is like, that's okay, but it's not that exciting. And over the course of Nugent-Hopkins' injury, that might not mean a ton for Yamamoto. But yes, Sorry, I don't mean to downplay the possibility that Yamamoto could become more of a go-to at 5-on-5 and have some opportunity to get in on some power play points.
Yeah, just someone that if he's been dropped, at least add him to your watch list now if you don't want to jump on him right away.
Yeah.
One more injury, not really much to discuss yet because we don't know the details, but Cam Talbot left the Winter Classic after the second period with a lower body injury. There haven't been any updates yet, but just FYI, just like we talked about with Mike Smith, I think I'd be more interested in grabbing Kaapo Kakkonen than Mikko Koskinen, like, assuming similar injury timelines, but who knows? Maybe Talbot will be back by the next game. The Wild play Thursday and Saturday next week, and then only Friday the week after. So if Talbot is out a couple weeks, he actually only misses 3 games. It's not as if trip over yourself to grab Kaapo Kakkonen, because even if he gets 3 games in a row, it's not so much. Maybe it'll help you. I mean, it's not nothing, but yeah, we'll have to wait and see an update from Talbot, but consider Kakkonen if you need a goalie.
Did you skip Hyman on purpose? You're muted.
No, sorry, I did not do that on purpose, but that's okay. I'll just get to him now.
Okay.
You want to say something about this Talbot
Yeah, I'll just
thing?
answer quickly. There's nowhere to really go with this right now because we don't know if Talbot's out, but the Wild are a good team. Kakkonen has not proven himself to be a good goalie. However, Talbot has not been great this season either, and he has done reasonably well for anybody rostering him. So that makes Kakkonen an appealing fantasy option if he does get to start a run of games, if Talbot is on the shelf for any amount of time.
Yeah, I would definitely be excited to get Kokkonen's games just because Minnesota's a good team if he is playing a long string of games. There's actually a player on Edmonton I forgot to bring up that I did want to ask you about. A bunch of the patrons have been asking us about Zach Hyman, who went pointless for 4 straight games before assisting on Nurse's second period goal yesterday versus the Islanders. So a couple of specific questions, like Ashley said that she traded Pierre-Luc Dubois for him and said, I'm a big Oilers fan, so that played a part into my trade, and also the fact that Hyman is left wing, right wing, and Dubois is obviously only center eligible. But of course, he hasn't been playing that well lately. Specifically, she said yesterday he looked non-existent on that line, no puck control, bad positioning, hoping it's just an adjustment coming back from injury. Kevin A. Bear, who is coordinating the couple for us this year, said that he has Hyman in a category league, and he's wondering if he should hold him or use his spot to bring back one of his injured guys or just stream. It's a 12-team league, so there are a lot of good options out there. So first of all, kind of sad that we're even having this conversation, because going into the season, I remember we had Dom Lucian on the show, and we were talking about there was so much excitement around Hyman about how he's a good player, he's in this amazing spot, how could he not just be gangbusters? And then he was so good to start the year, and now he's in a little bit of a cold streak. I don't know. If I had Hyman, I would just tell myself, Elon, don't worry about it. As long as he's top line, top power play with McDavid, just chill and just assume that you're holding him forever, so you don't even have to think about it. But is that too simple? I just feel like he's just not someone that I could ever consider dropping. But also, I don't have him, so I haven't really had to think about it too hard.
I do roster him in a league, and I'm nowhere near considering dropping Zach Hyman. And I would tell myself what you just said you would. Don't worry about it. It's going to be okay. I think at least 60 points is reasonable for Zach Hyman. Even with this cold stretch he's been on, he's not far off that pace, which I know is cold comfort for anyone who's been struggling, because 7 points in the last 15 games for Zach Hyman has not been any fun as somebody who has him on his roster. But I really don't think twice about holding on to Zach Hyman. The one thing I'll wonder aloud about is he missed 3 games with an upper body injury. Going into missing those 3 games, he wasn't consistently good. And coming out of those, of course, Hyman has been quiet as well. And so I wonder if maybe he was playing with something that should have been rested earlier, and now he's back, and maybe it's still bugging him. I don't know. This is just a thought. I'm not seeing any obvious sign that it is, but that's my way to excuse Hyman and what's been going on. Of course, you also look at McDavid's numbers to see, well, what's McDavid doing? McDavid is just fine. Edmonton's won 2 of their last 11 games, but McDavid has 13 points over the course of that skid. So he's not the problem.
I don't know. That's not that great for McDavid. Last year he was on a run where he was 2 points a game. You're talking about just above 1 point a game. Is that even a 100-point pace? You're talking about it as if it's not bad. To me, I'm that's a huge disappointment. We thought he would be a 150-point guy this year.
Okay, you're right. So if I adjust my expectations to McDavid, you're right. Maybe that's not quite as good as you'd hope. And any McDavid roster is yeah, that is a problem. That's interesting,
That's like
Elon.
Nino Niederreiter numbers.
I was just thinking more in the context of like Edmonton still losing 9 of 11 while their superstar is still like going off pretty well, but he needs to go off like two superstars wrapped up in one. And the context is also like Hyman not being able to do a lot, even though McDavid is still going off like still a bona fide superstar. If he scored at this pace all season long, he'd still be a league leader in scoring. I think overall this is a hiccup for Hyman and for Edmonton and for McDavid. I mentioned their 7.6% shooting percentage as a team over the last 11 games. I think that'll correct, and we'll see more points coming once it does.
All right, so yeah, let's hold off a little bit. Maybe if we're like a couple weeks later and Hyman still hasn't done anything, maybe we need to take another. Well, we'll need to reassess the situation and see if there's more to it. But right now, yeah, I think it's too early to get too concerned. Let's end the show with a couple hot and cold streaks here, Brian, or at least I should say end. Okay. Let's end this first half of the show before I get to my fun draft with Ben and the Fantasy Hockey Life guys with some hot streaks and cold streaks. I want to go to Boston, okay? The Bruins have been trying out some new lines in their 4-3 win over Buffalo on Saturday. They put Craig Smith on the top line with Marchand and Bergeron, and that bumped Pasternak to play on the second line with Hall and Haula, which actually Eric Haula being on the second line bumped Charlie Coyle to center the third line with Foligno and DeBrusque. So that was on Saturday. Boston did also play today in a game where they beat Detroit 5-1. I'm just bringing that up now, and I'm bringing up the lines over on Frozen Tools. And yeah, it looks like once again they went with Hall, Haula, and Pasternak, and then Bergeron, Marchand, and Craig Smith. And once again, Craig Smith got a point. So he had a goal in that game on Saturday. He had an assist today on a goal from Bergeron. It was assisted by Smith and Marchand. So now it's 2 games in a row. Seems to be going well. The Bruins had a very dominant win today. So I guess it's 2 questions, right? Let's first start with Craig Smith. So then it's a pretty good spot, right? He's like on the top line. He's producing there. Seems like the type of player that I'd be rushing to grab. How would you compare him to like a Texier or to like a Michael Bunting who we had at the top of the Leafs list? I think right now I'd want Craig Smith over all of them. I think it's the kind of thing where like I'm less confident that Craig Smith is going to hold that spot like as long as Bunting, but for as long as he has it, give me Craig Smith because he's had really good runs in the past.
He has. We've seen Craig Smith be a great third wheel complementary player on top lines before, so I'd prefer him ahead of Texier for sure. Season long, for the same reasons you said, Elon, I'd prefer Bunting because I think Bunting is more or less guaranteed that top 6 spot, whereas Craig Smith is not. Or if it's a top 6 spot, it's not as good because it's not the top 3 in Boston for Craig Smith. But short term, especially with Boston more likely to play games in the near future, I will take Craig Smith as somebody that you might choose to add for Michael Bunting if you are deciding to drop him.
Yeah, I think definitely, I'm not going to say like pause the pod, like I don't want to say that too often, and it's not that crazy of a thing, but I think definitely you should be checking to see if Craig Smith is available and looking at the bottom of your roster. This is a really good spot for him, and now he has points in 2 straight, playing with Marchand and Bergeron. On the flip side, not great news for David Pasternak managers who were already enduring a cold stretch, right? Like Pasta's only managed 2 assists in his last 8 games. That was going into today. Okay, the Bruins scored 5 goals. Got to imagine Pasta did something. Checking right now, and nothing! That wasn't a bit, by the way. I didn't know. And now I'm seeing he had 2 shots. He was +1, so I guess he was on the ice for a goal, but didn't get a piece of it. So that's now 2 assists in his last 9 games. This is a really bad run for Pasternak. And now it gets even more concerning if he's not playing with Marchand and Bergeron. Like if this lasted all season, I'd be super concerned. Of course, it's very possible that Boston just goes back to that normal top perfection line sooner rather than later. But how concerned would you be right now about Pasternak if you had him? We've had a few questions. People wanted to ask us what they should do about him. I'll be honest, like I had him in one league and I wasn't too worried. Someone decided to try to buy low on him and send me an offer that like I just couldn't refuse, even though I wasn't looking to trade him, but I traded him, and now I'm like, okay, well, I'm kind of glad now I don't have to stress out about the fact that he just went pointless for the 7th time in his last 9 games.
I can't blame anyone for stressing out about David Pasternak and his lack of production so far this season, but I'm optimistic you won't have much to stress over the rest of the way. At least you shouldn't. Like, I know this is going to be frustrating for anyone who's been frustrated by Pasternak to just hear everything's okay, but everything's okay under the hood for Pasternak. He looks exactly the way he has for the last few years, where he's averaged over the course of the 3 seasons a 90 odd point pace. But at 5-on-5 this year so far, even though Pasternak is doing everything right, he's hit the bad variance trifecta. That's a low shooting percentage where he's shooting under 4% versus his usual 13%, nearly a 10% drop in his shooting percentage. In his points participation at 5-on-5, Pasternak is involved in just half the goals scored while he's on the ice versus the usual 3/4 of the goals scored while he's on the ice. And then his on ice shooting percentage even is down. Fewer than 7% of the shots taken by Boston while Pasta's on the ice this season are going in versus the usual 10%. So those are the three biggest markers of variance that can explain a player going unreasonably hot or unreasonably cold. And Pasta ticks all three boxes. Unfortunately, for anybody dealing with Pasternak on their roster, refuge can usually be taken in power play numbers. If not 5-on-5, the power play is still okay, and that's sort of keeping him afloat. But bad variance on the power play also crushing David Pasternak, where he's involved in just 43% of the goals scored while he's on the ice versus his usual 80%. All this points participation, I'll give you one number to summarize it. Just 2 secondary assists for Pasternak through 28 games. Normally, he would have, I don't know, at least 6 or 7 going by his career rates. And you can do all the math on the goal stuff too. Just regress his shooting percentage, regress his points participation, regress his shooting percentage, regress his points participation, regress his on-ice shooting percentage, and Pasternak still looks like that 90-ish point player, maybe even better than he always has. It's just not coming to fruition. So I actually think this is a really fantastic time to go see if the Pasternak owner is so frustrated that they're willing to let him be someone else's problem and see if you can swing a deal to buy low.
Yeah, like I don't disagree, but also you didn't comment on the line change, right? Like what if
Yeah,
everything you're saying is
okay.
true? What if the problem though is Bruce Cassidy doesn't follow these stats? And what if he's just thinking, the guy's not producing, let me change the lines. Oh, we just won 5-1. I'm a brilliant genius. Let's just leave things how they are. And that would clearly be a problem, right? If he wasn't playing with Marchand and Bergeron?
It would, but first off, he'll still be on the top power play. And second off, the reason I didn't even acknowledge the line thing is because we've seen this happen before and it's never lasted a significant amount of time. So for me, actually, I'm hoping, and maybe you can tell me if this is wrong-headed, I'm hoping that the Pasternak manager like you is freaking out about that and thinking, oh no, his time on the top line is over. Craig Smith is doing well with Marchand Bergeron. They don't need Pasternak there. He's been demoted and he's going to stay there. Anytime we've seen Pasternak or those top 3 in Boston get broken up at any point, it has never, ever lasted. And there were a couple times where we thought maybe this time, and it didn't. And this doesn't feel like one of those times where I was like, oh, maybe this time at all. So I really don't think it will if I had to take a guess.
Okay, I hear you. But maybe this time. No, just kidding. Okay, so let's put it this way then. Obviously, yeah, if you could buy low, that's great. But obviously, it depends how low. Like, who are you trading? Like, for example, before I asked you about Tarasenko versus Line A, you said you'd rather have Tarasenko. So if you have Tarasenko, goals in 5 straight games, I feel like you might be able to pull Pasternak for Tarasenko. Do you send that offer right now?
Yeah, I would send it right away.
Oh boy. Okay. Let us know. Tweet at us at Keeping Karlsson if you take that advice, and I'll be really curious to know if anyone agrees with you or is convinced by you. I mean, everything you're saying makes sense. My concern is Bruce Cassidy, not following these low variance markers and I don't know, changing things up. But like you say, it's happened before. So sky isn't falling. Maybe you could turn your amazing Tarasenko draft pick into an amazing David Pasternak trade acquisition. Okay, so one more hot streak to close things out. I want to go to Nashville. I already talked about this guy with Lewis on Thursday, but once again, I think I need to bring up Tanner Jeannot on Nashville because he scored 2 goals versus Chicago yesterday, bringing him to 9 points his last 8 games and 3 points in 3 games since he was bumped back to line 3 with everyone healthy. Like when Lewis and I were talking about him, we were talking about a hot streak guy who's now in the bottom 6, so probably not worth holding and a good potential sell. But if you didn't sell, if you held him, first of all, you're happy because you've gotten more production out of him. And also now it's like we're seeing that he's still potentially able to produce in the bottom 6, unless you're going to say, this is completely unsustainable. I wonder if this is just a guy that's going to be able to continue this amazing season, regardless of where he plays in the lineup. Of course, it's also just been 3 games. I'm just curious to get your take on Tanner Jeannot after he's continued this hot streak and is now, like I said, 9 points in his last 8 games.
I think Tanner Jeanneau is actually good. I really do. I think he's at least actually good as a middle sixer. He has 4 goals on his last 12 shots, which has grabbed a lot of attention. And of course, that shooting percentage isn't sustainable, but Jeanneau looks like a solid middle sixer. And in a year where middle sixers like Ryan Hartman and Marcus Foligno have broken out for sustained periods of time, I can't just write off someone like Tanner Jeanneau, especially because he is putting up hits as he goes, right? Even if the points aren't coming, at least he's helping you in the hits column. There's definitely weak deployment for Tanner Jeanneau, but he does a lot. And you and I were talking about him off air before the show, and you called him the poor man's Marcus Foligno when I brought up that comparison. But I'll put it this way: Jeanneau is on pace for just 3 fewer points than Foligno this season on a 50-point full season pace versus Foligno's 53-point pace. Of course, Jeanneau is playing with Sissons and Jakov Trenin, who neither one of those are Kevin Fiala. So I will still give the edge to Marcus Foligno, but I like poor man's just seems a little harsh for Jeanneau. I think he's closer to Foligno than being like the light version of him.
You know, say what you will, but Colton Sissons has 7 points in his last 5 games, while Kevin Fiala has, well, actually, he's scored 3 goals in his last couple games, but still fewer points in his last 5. So that technically, you could say that it's better playing with Sissons than with Fiala. But obviously, no, I agree with you.
I love that. I love that. Yeah.
Just saying, Colton Sissons, by the way, like at one point, maybe we have to say that Colton Sissons now becomes interesting because he's playing with Tanner Jeanneau. Like, he's on a hot streak. Like, if we were ranking Craig Smith, Texier, Bunting, where does like Jeanneau and Colton Sissons fit in this if they're also out there in free agency?
Okay. I'd say Jeanneau probably goes just ahead of Texier and Sissons just below Texier. Because Sissons, to me, like I'm looking at where his production is coming from. I mean, I see a couple markers where it's like, oh yeah, he shouldn't be doing quite this well. Like his points participation is unreasonably high, but his shooting percentage is okay. Like there's just there's some ups and some downs. But Jeanneau's actual, like when I'm looking at his shot rates and his expected goal rates, sorry, did I say Jeanneau or Sissons?
Jeanneau.
Okay, let me just start that over. So you said where did I fit Sissons with?
I said like Jeanneau and Sissons, where do they fit in with Smith and Texier? Also,
yeah, I know you got to go.
No, I was actually going to say that Meyer is making an appearance on the pod. I don't know if you're aware,
yeah.
But nothing you can do about
that. No, she is.
Yeah, that's okay. Just finish off the.
You sure?
Yeah. You could always reference her and be like, clearly my daughter agrees or something.
Hey, Joe.
Oh, he's muted now. It's just me. How's everyone doing here? The show's basically over.
I'll just go for it then. Okay.
Okay.
Here we go. I would have Jeanneau just above Texier and Sissons below Texier. And the reason for that is when I look at Jeanneau's numbers, like I said, things are healthy. Like his shot rates are nice. His expected goal rates are nice. He seems, like I said, to be actually contributing to the offense that's happening around him. Whereas Sissons in his numbers, I mean, he doesn't shoot a whole lot. That's not his bread and butter. So his expected goal rates are lower too. But he's seen, I don't know. I'm just not as sold on Sissons' game as a whole. Like maybe it's because we've seen more of Colton Sissons in his career than we have in Tanner Jeanneau, who's just, I don't think he's played 50 NHL games yet, whereas Sissons has 6 or 7 NHL seasons under his belt. But I just said we shouldn't write off a mid-sixer. So maybe I'm being a little rash in writing off Colton Sissons, but I would rather Alex Texier just ahead of him. But they're probably interchangeable, especially if Jeanneau keeps doing really well. It's just weird to want to invest. Like I can look at Texier in Columbus and see he's playing with Gustav Nyquist. And I look at Jeanneau and he's playing with, again, Sissons and Trenin, which just doesn't excite me and doesn't strike me as a line that can keep sustaining their production. It's crazy right now. You've got Granlund producing on one line, Johansson producing on another line, and then this other line of who we would have called randoms doing really well on another line for Nashville. They're finally getting production.
Yeah, this is a good team. And they also have Roman Josi having like a Norris caliber season. And UC Saros has been no slouch. So I think that Nashville's a team that people should definitely be paying attention to now that they have this scary-ish third line. Brian, so that's it for what we've got for everyone for this portion of the show. It's been a blast talking to you again after taking a couple weeks off. I guess we didn't fully take the time off because we had that really fun patron cast, which I really enjoyed. And thanks so much to the patrons, by the way, for all your support over this past year. You've made this year a lot of fun and you've helped power this podcast. I hope you enjoyed that patron cast. Yeah, so you know what? I'm not even going to do a plug to ask other people to become patrons. I just want to take this time to thank our current patrons and say you people are the best, and we're going to do everything we can to make it worth your investment in us over the rest of this season and, starting next season for the rest of 2022. So thank you so much. If you like the show, obviously go ahead and subscribe to us on Apple Podcast, Spotify, all that good stuff. And you know what, Brian? I don't even need to ask you to read the credits because I actually did that at the end of part 2. So your job is done here, Brian. Unless you have any final words, I'm going to cut to what's coming up next.
I can't wait to hear it, Elon. Just you thanked the patrons for being patrons. I also want to thank the listeners. I know this is a topsy-turvy time for fantasy, and around this time of year, some of you might start to feel like fantasy is hard and a drag. We're going to do our best to keep it fun for you all season long, and we always want your feedback. So you can write us at Keeping Karlsson and how we can do that. You can do us a favor, a big favor, and write us a really glowing, positive 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or any other podcast service. And just stick with us. And we're really happy to have you with us for the ride for another calendar year.
Okay, so with that, Brian, here's the plan. We're going to cut to a break. And then after the break, we're going to go into my show with the Fantasy Hockey Life guys and Ben, where we did a draft. It's all going to be explained, so I don't need to really promote it anymore. But it's going to be the first half is going to be on this podcast. So the first half is going to be on this podcast right now, and then you'll go check out the Fantasy Hockey Life episode for the second half. I will say that I have a pick in this draft. I don't want to spoil anything, but I made a pick. I think it might be on the other side of the show, on the episode that's going to come out on the Fantasy Hockey Life feed, but I made a pick that I kind of got mocked for, and that player just scored a goal. So just saying, Also, by the way, I had some players who did really well yesterday, and I just want you to know also that this draft was done Saturday afternoon. My Toronto pick was made before the Toronto game. Just keep that in mind as well. But okay, I guess no one cares at this point. So let's just wrap this up. Enjoy part 2 of this show with our friends Victor, Jesse, and Ben. See ya. Okay, we did it.
All right.
Good show, pal. Thanks everyone for joining. This was great. I'm going to go hang out with my in-laws for the rest of the night now, which is it'll be nice.
It's nice to have company. That's cool.
Yeah, it's definitely. Okay. So bye everyone. Thanks a lot.
All right, bye YouTube crew. Bye.